I'm sitting here this morning with Gordy and Diane Bowers at Lake Minnetonka Sailing School, located on Lighthouse Island on the beautiful, sunny Lake Minnetonka. And thank you, Gordy and Diane, for coming here today to speak with me about your childhoods, your experience sailing, and just your lives on and around Lake Minnetonka.
When I moved out to Lake Minnetonka, I was 10 years old. And when I look back at it, it obviously changed my life. You never know what the road less traveled is going to be, but I know the road I've been on. And so it did change my life. I was 10 years old coming out here. And we moved out about 2 days before Christmas. So we had a Christmas celebration. And it was, at that time, there were four. I'm the oldest of six brothers. So we had four of our brothers, and the family was growing. So Dad had to move to the suburbs and give us a little growing room. And so for Mom, I'm sure our house in town wasn't all that big. But here, we lived just across the bay here, and it looked like paradise to me. You know, everything looked so far in the country. You know, if you've lived most of the time in the city, and you know, as a kid, you take vacations, you get around, you know, you have grandparents, and you go places. So, but this seemed like real country then. Now, obviously, it's a lot different place. And so Christmas Day was kind of the lake was out here, it was frozen. You could just, you know, I can't tell you how many days we would explore the shoreline in the wintertime and get out on the ice and see the snow, and just a totally different life from the city. But the thing that really stuck was the summers, because the yacht club was just across the bay. So it's like maybe a quarter mile. And every Saturday, Sunday, Wednesday, you could see the white sails out there going back and forth. And that was just something that I got in the back of my head I wanted to do. So the earliest years, you know, you have your summers. I didn't sail till about 2 years later, when I was 12.
Okay. And
of course, we basically begged in those days, you couldn't go to a sailing class like we have now, you know, so boats weren't available unless you owned a boat. And most of the people around, a lot of the people around the lake owned boats, quite different than today, but, or owned sailboats, I should say. So we were going to get a boat from one of the Pratts, actually, over here. He had a boat, and it was a nice looking boat. It was called Sunstroke, and I used to go over in the back bay and draw pictures of the boat. You know, I was so fascinated by it. But anyway, long story short, we got the boat, went up to Johnson Boat Works, which was our local builder back then. He built over half the scows at that time.
Wow.
I have a lot of great memories of the old shop. They made the woods, they had the ribs of the planks. They used to shove the planks in a long tube and heat them up so they could bend them over the thing. You know, it was quite an experience, you know. Things like that, you never forget those things when you're a kid. So now we were able to come out here and start sailing. And my dad didn't know about sailing, my mom didn't sail. So I think that kind of works both ways. Sometimes most of the time it's good to have parents that sail, but it can go dark at times, you know. So I've just talked to enough kids now to know some of the background stories. But anyway, we started from scratch. Literally, I remember sailing the boat past the dock and almost throwing a rope out to lasso it like you would a bull at a bull deal. So anyway, it was, so we started from about as low a beginning as you could, you know, but I loved being out there. And the next step, of course, was to come over with a sailing school over here. And at that time, they had about 20 boats in the school. And obviously, we were the newcomer on the block, and so you had to kind of fit in when you can. And I was lucky enough to, the only coach I ever had in sailing was Ted Greer. And he was a huge role model for me. Obviously, you know, we're learning a new sport. He won an inland Expo championship. He was, I think, the captain of the Michigan football team, or not the football team, but the hockey team.
Okay.
And they won an NCAA champ. I didn't know some of that stuff till later.
Okay.
But, and then to boot, then he was a principal at Edina High School.
Really?
As well. So, and about the time we moved out here too, I started playing hockey as well. Okay. So I kind of, Ted, I'm sure I told Ted of my experiences, and he probably But we had a connection right away.
A lot of connections.
So the other thing I remember about, well, the first thing I remember is having fun friends. You know, you don't get into any sport, I think, without having friends. And with the sailing school, as we're running it now, we realize the value of having friends and making them and going places. You know, we just came back from, you know, over in Wisconsin and sailing, and the parents go now. I can still remember when my parents took us to our first out-of-state trip over to Wisconsin, Lake Pewaukee, you know, and it was an awesome time. Ted, you know, I gradually got better and better. I had like a 2.5-year career with the X-Boat before the age limit ran out. And the kids were younger then, they've got an extra year now. But so my first half year, you know, I learned, and I was out, I sailed just about every day. And Ted told me one time, he said, Gordy, you know, you're gonna be a really good sailor. And he said, I know that because you're out there all the time. So you have to have a talent for it. You know, I was lucky to be a pretty good athlete, and there's a lot of athleticism in sailing, and so it was kind of a natural fit that way, a sport for me. I played hockey, I played tennis, played just about every sport, but those are things that growing up really, and you don't realize what a privileged kid you were, you know. I mean, we look at the kids that we coach here today, and you know, we keep telling them, you know, you kids are really pretty lucky. You get to do stuff that almost nobody else gets to do.
Yeah.
So that's a special thing about the lake, and when it changed my life, it really did.
That's amazing. So, that's great. Diane, can you tell us about your childhood and growing up? Can you tell us about your childhood, growing up on the lake, and your experiences on the lake as a kid and a teenager? Start at the very beginning.
Okay. My dad bought a lot on Big Island, and we he decided to have a big, huge tent, and we had an outhouse, and we had so much fun out there. And then the next year, we had some people build a cabin, and we would go out we'd leave the house in St. Louis Park on Friday night, and we would stay the whole weekend. And of course, my sister and I, Sally, we would go over to Danceland all the time. And
Tell us about Danceland.
I got a date.
Oh.
And we went out on the roller coaster, and I had a wig on, and
Story.
it was going so fast it blew off the wig. And then I had to try to find the wig, and I couldn't find the wig, and he never asked me out again. But anyway, we just loved Minnetonka. My dad was a fisherman, and my sister became a Viking cheerleader, and I went to the U of Minnesota, and I was in the marching band, and was first clarinet, and
That's
that was
amazing.
fun. Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, I was, yeah. And so, but then that's about it. It was just, I saw sailboats out there, but we were always on a motorboat, you know, flying around. And, so then I want to tell you about my dad didn't like my boyfriend, so he stuck me on on the island, and I went to the vets camp.
Oh.
And was in charge of the salads for all the people that came out at the vets camp. And that was just an amazing place.
Well, I want to add one thing. When Diane makes salads at home, we'd have the salads for about 4 days.
Wow.
So
what?
you're used to making
big
I brought you
salads.
high amounts of salad at one time from the camp. So you still got that
Yeah, right.
when you make salad.
So the vets camp, how did that work?
Well, you know, it was a real fancy place in 1900, but then they, everything went down, and then they built the vets camp, and it was for people that were in World War II, and they could go there and with their families, and there was all kinds of white little cottages, and it was just unbelievable. You just can't imagine. I just wish they would do it all over again. And, because for people that didn't have a lot of money, and so that was it.
That's great.
And then I got married, and my husband wanted to buy a sailboat, and so we joined the Wayzata Yacht Club, and I became the executive secretary for 16 years there, and we had so many different boats. I can't even count how many boats I had. And my ex-husband, he was a Commodore, and he started up the sonar fleet, and we won everything with my daughter Erica and Mike Fanberg. And then after a while we got a divorce, and then I went to work for Gordy Bowers.
Had you heard about Gordy before? Did you two know of each other?
Yeah, I walked in one day and I said, I'm going to buy my husband the jib for the sonar. And so they said, so Tom, Gordy's brother, came out and he said, here's your jib, and I paid for it. And then he says, my secretary just quit on me. Can you be my secretary? And so
He didn't know you at all when he said that?
no, he knew me from
From Wayzata.
doing all the, because I was a Wayzata person. I
Okay.
was not with Minnetonka, and the Minnetonka people are really, I mean, their sailing was really, really great. And the Wayzata was more like yachts and keelboats.
Okay.
And Minnetonka was all scows. And so I decided I wanted to do that, so I went home and asked my husband if I could do that, and he said absolutely not. And then I kept thinking about it, and I thought that I would love to work for Gordy and Tom Bowers. And so I went and I called him up and asked if he still had if I could do it, and he said yes. And so that's how I met Gordy, and at the Bauer sales, and we had so much fun there. So I was there for 6 years, and then Gordy got a divorce, and I got a divorce, and we got married. And
Took a little longer than that, but basically, right, yeah.
So tell me more, both of you, about Bauer sales.
About what?
About Bowers
All the
sales.
Bauer sales.
A day,
Okay.
a normal day of Bowers sales.
Yeah. People would come in with their sales, and they would have torn their sales, and so I sat there and took them in and brought them into the office and stuff, and then they would there were so many people, and there were so many, a lot of Gordy's and Tom's relatives worked there and sewed on all the machines, and then we even made a ton of hockey bags.
Really?
Oh yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
I didn't
still
know that.
have them.
Yeah,
They're the best.
Yeah.
You still have them?
Yeah.
Some of it, yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, they were just so great. And but then when I went through my divorce, I decided to put me out on some of those machines, because I was a really good sewer back in the day, and so
You got to do the front office and the back office both.
Wow.
Yeah, that way.
Yep.
Yeah.
and then we decided to get married, and then that just changed everything. We just went to regatta after regatta and making so many more friends, and it was just so wonderful. We did have a lot of parties here.
Okay.
Shangoya was just unbelievable.
Really?
And I was in charge.
I haven't heard about that. Tell me.
Yeah, and it was just such great. We were dancing in the
Oh my goodness.
in the
Was there food and music?
Oh yeah,
and
it had everything.
drinking?
yeah,
All
and
of
you
it?
couldn't even hardly get on the dance floor.
It was
Yeah,
so busy.
It was and I was the bestacle. What is that word again?
The what though?
Well, anyway, I had to try to find people that didn't pay their money.
Oh,
Yeah.
You know?
And there was a lot of that
you
going
were
on.
the debt collector.
Yeah.
Yeah, so because we would invite Wayzata all the time here.
Okay.
And I loved Wayzata.
Yeah.
And so I always wanted them at all the parties. So,
What's your craziest Lighthouse Island party memory?
The parties, yeah.
well, the Shangoya ones, you know.
What was that?
Where?
What was the Shangoya parties? What were those?
Well, it was a party that was for everybody to dance
Okay.
and eat, and all three of my kids raced sailboats, and Erica went to out to New York and sailed in the Rolex, and Gordy coached her, and Morgan went to, well, Erica went to Michigan, or not Michigan, Wisconsin University, and Morgan was sailor, and he went to the United States Merchant Marine Academy, and Zach went to Charleston. And I wish I could redo all those days, and
Yeah.
redo and but we're still having fun, aren't we?
Well, yeah, but
Oh my
You two
God.
are having the most
Well-
fun.
And now I'm gonna be the what am I gonna
the
be?
greeter, you're talking about the
Greeter.
greeter.
Oh, that
I'm
would be
gonna be
so
the
great.
greeter.
You are the perfect greeter for the island.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Gordy-
Those parties were pretty special. They don't do that. I think they did, I don't know how many of those Shanghai parties there were. There were maybe 2 or 3 of them, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So, but anyway, they just kept growing and getting bigger.
And we should really
it
do that
was
again.
crazy. Your party once it kind of gets out of control, And then, of course, the next couple of weeks, the neighbors are calling and complaining and all of that stuff. So it was too good a time, it just didn't last, but it was, while it was happening, it was awesome. And I think, it was good for both yacht clubs, but they've kind of grown away from that now, which is a little unfortunate. But we made the effort to make those things happen, and so, but they were good memories, yeah, for sure.
So tell us more about Bowers Sales.
Well, let me start a little farther back than that, how I got interested from sailing here. After my first half year, I really got into the sailing stuff, and we won the championship series out here. And
in what boat?
In the X boat. That was the only boat you could have, and you had to own one. You couldn't lease one. You couldn't. They just weren't available. But there were 20 boats out here. That was a big fleet, and And after I got out of that, then I didn't have, Dad was thinking about how's he going to send all those kids to college by then and still pay the mortgage on the lake home, So there wasn't a lot of extra. So I'd gotten pretty good at sailing, and I essentially sold myself to one of my best friends to crew on his boat. So we had two boats. He started with a D boat, which was a 20-foot boat with 3 people, and then we worked our Chuck Gorgon and Brad Robinson were the big names out here. And eventually we were able to grind them down. And my best memory of that is it was on Lake McCoska now. But we had won the race, and Stewie was so happy he threw up his hands and started running back and tripped on the centerboard and fell in the lake. My brother Tom is looking like, what the hell just happened, And so, but then we moved up to the E-class, and when I think back on it, most people in those days, it was more of I don't know what you would call it, not an amateur sport, not kind of an elite sport, but it wasn't, the captain was a captain of the ship, and they gave all the orders, and everybody just kind of would salute and do what they had to do. But by necessity, we kind of stumbled into the partnership with Stuart Wells and I handled all the tactics, all the strategy, where we're going to go. And he worked on the boat speed, and then my brother Tom trimmed spinnaker. And it was just a deal where we kind of divided up everything, and bang, we were hard to beat right away. So, and kids get pretty full of themselves. Story, we won the Iowa. I still have the photograph of it. It's a yachting magazine. Used to be the magazine for sailing, and on the front cover, that was us. And it shows us going around the top mark. We won I think it was 4 out of 4 or 5 out of 5.
Wow.
At the inland championship. So it was a big deal, and we were like 21, 22 years old.
Wow.
And so after, then they had the awards thing. And we stayed overnight because it was over in Wisconsin. And the next night out in the field the next morning out in the field where we kept our boats, there was this guy in the back who had his head down in the bilge looking like for the motor or what was it, how come we were that fast?
Yeah.
We did do some pretty creative things. The rules weren't quite as rigid as they are now, and so we looked back and I looked at Stuart, I said, do you want to kick him in the butt or should I? Thank God we didn't. That turned out to be the Commodore. And they couldn't get over the fact that we blew these guys away 5 straight races. It was just like,
oh, that is amazing.
So we didn't do it, but we thought about it.
Well.
But and as I said, we were lucky. Then we bought a sea boat that was out here. And it was an old beat-up boat. This boat was an old sea scow, and Smile, what they call it, his nickname was Smiley Freytag. He used to work for Buddy Mogus, and he was a boat salesman. He'd go around, and they had an awesome seaboat fleet back then. And but this boat was definitely on its second 100,000 miles. So we fixed it up, varnished it. It was wood back then, and took care of it and loved it. And I still got the name plaque. I still got the name plaque that we got from my brother just a couple days ago. It was Sun Dodgers. And one of the woodworking guys at Johnson Boat Works made it for me.
That is so
and
cool.
It's all carved and it's pretty cool.
I would love to see
and we
that.
put it on the back of the boat, And but putting that boat in, it was so old, and we kept it in Stuart Wells' barn over the wintertime. So we put it back in and launched it over here. The race was out about north home, about a mile and a half north, and it was a fairly windy day, and we get out on the starting line, and we're starting to take water. And, the water's kind of like up to our ankles in there. And I looked at Tom, I said, I think we're going to have to head home, because if we don't get home right now, this boat's going to sink right on the spot. So what happened, once it's soaked up, it's soaked up, and then the planks expand a little bit, and it was okay. But that first boat, we had 3 Sun Dodgers. We had that.
Really?
No, the 2 Sun Dodgers, I'm sorry. We had that one, and my first race, the first big inland race that we won was over at White Bear. And I can remember the wind direction, remember how we came across the 2 points there, and just everything about it. And so everybody that's been successful in the sport, they can always remember their first big win, and that was that for us. That kind of gave us the confidence to work a little harder and do a little more, and one thing led to another, and we were able to win a lot. I finished up the University of Minnesota undergrad as a psychology major and art history minor, and mostly because of my mother. My mother has a real bent for the psychology part of things, and so anyway, that got me started.
Did you tell them about that your mom was a nurse and your dad was
Well, yeah, they were the classic doctor and nurse. My dad, just his backstory on him was that he went to school he went to high school up in Virginia, Minnesota.
Okay.
And that's because he wasn't very disciplined down here. They lived in Minneapolis, and that's where he grew up. And so they moved him up to my aunt and uncle's house, and they basically made discipline the kid,
Okay.
And Aunt Ann, my aunt was a school teacher, and Uncle Tom was a big businessman in the Iron Range city. And so when he graduated, he had an engineering degree, but unfortunately that was a depression. It was in 1929, and so there were no jobs for engineers especially. So my Uncle Tom had some money that he had wisely got some money out of the stock market and diversified, did some things that a prudent, somebody that knows a lot about finance did, And so then he sent him to medical school. So Dad put in 4 years of that and an internship, and he was 31 when he got out.
Okay.
And he met Mother when he was an intern up in Duluth.
Really?
So.
And they had some really good parties over at
Really?
Over at our house over there, yeah. Oh, yeah.
I'm sure.
Yeah, those.
I'm sure there were
So
great
once we
parties
got a
over
little
there.
older, then, that was the hot spot to do. I think Dad bought a lot of
Everybody
groceries
loved
that we ate a lot, but our friends ate a lot too,
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was a local hot spot,
Yeah.
for things going on.
And tell us more about your mother.
So Mom, I don't know, there are not many people that can handle
She
6
had
wild Indian boys.
6 boys.
Yeah, that's a special
And we were
woman.
all over the lake. We would be, when the ice would go out, we'd be jumping around on the ice floes and playing hockey and doing all this stuff, and they had to, and that's not quite as helicopter parent as it is today, but they would drive us to, some of the different things, get us up to the high school. And Mom had a car, and Dad had a car, so we could commute into town. But she didn't drive much, so we drove that thing, and we nicknamed that car the Tank because it was a big, huge thing, and we could.
Do you remember what kind of car it was?
It was a Buick. I don't know. That's the only name I remember. I don't know who made it, but it was fun. And she was a good Christian person. She joined a Baptist church, and so as a result, when I was I didn't dance, I didn't play cards, I didn't do anything that was kind of fun.
Really?
And that didn't make life any easier when I was in grade school or even junior high school, because we had to go out for special religious education classes, and now who's this kid getting out of school and stuff like that.
I had to teach them to dance.
Really?
Yeah. And play cards.
And play cards too, yeah. I'm not very good at either one.
So you had gotten into your 40s without dancing or playing cards?
No drinking, no nothing.
Wow.
No, Never. I didn't smoke. I watched my mom. My mom couldn't smoke, couldn't quit.
Okay.
And I just said, some of my brothers all smoked, but I just said, I don't know, I want to have one drag. I might like it, and it just scared the hell out of me. So,
Yeah.
Yeah.
and I had enough backbone to tell my friends no. When I think of it,
That's great.
that was a good thing. So those are all things that, again, I was lucky a lot of ways, coming out here and not getting into any bad habits, and playing sports was a big deal.
Tell him about Danny when he.
Well, this was a little further on, but I would, once we started the sale business, all of the brothers, we had 6 boys in the family, and 4 of them have won inland championships, inland or national championships. And the other 2 have all crewed for guys that were inland national. So there isn't, I don't think there's another family in the inland that has that kind of trait. We don't,
amazing.
We don't pound our chest about that stuff, you keep quiet, but that's the way it was.
It's amazing.
And Danny, when he won his inland set, he had a broken leg.
Really?
And he would walk, he'd come out on the dock with crutches, and I was crewing for him back then.
Yep.
And so we'd get him out on the dock, and then he'd put the crutches on shore and get into the boat, and we won an inland championship with him.
Wow.
He could tack, it wasn't great, but I was pretty hot picking the wind back then, and I got most of the shifts.
That? Have you ever seen something?
That's
Never
amazing.
Happened. Never happened, yeah. It just,
Wow.
so
Wow.
those are all things you grow up with, and you learn. This sport is a difficult, I probably read every sailing book that there ever was over that era, and between the reading and really no coaching after I was 15, I didn't have any coaching. I just learned from watching Buddy Melgus or Gordon Lindemann, or the guy Nat Robbins out here was a great sailor. He won a lot of things, and Nat just passed away with 101.
Wow.
101, just like 3 days ago. And
I'm sorry to hear that.
he was a role model. I crewed for him a couple of times, and I can remember going up a White Bear, and we're going up the lake, and I'm looking around to see what the sailing genius would do. And I could hear, I looked around, and he says, "Eyes forward." Oh, yeah. I never forgot it.
Oh, that's funny.
But the guy was a total, he sailed with his wife, and then they were 2 friends, and it was a different era in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
But those are the people. Stu Lemon, this flagpole over here.
Yep.
I remember Stu Lemon when I was just a little, I was probably 13, couldn't have been more in my first or second year sailing. For some reason he liked me, and he's the guy that did all those little model boats.
Yeah.
He had a house in Minneapolis. I went over there and we had dinner, and she showed me all this stuff down in the basement. He had all these tools and stuff. It was just so cool.
That is so cool.
And so the culture out here, I was lucky a lot of ways. I worked hard, but I love the sport. I love the feel of the boats, everything about sailing, from the pressure and the tensions of going into a regatta, and just I can remember a lot of races. I don't remember all the races. People say they remember all the races. I don't believe that. I don't believe that.
Well, you've done a lot of races.
Yep. The one other thing that really got me started, I got a lucky break when I was my last year in law school. And by then we won a lot of stuff in the seaboat class. But that was our specialty. I couldn't afford a E-boat, but we had that. And Buddy Melgus and this guy Gordon Lindemann. Buddy Melgus was the one that built the boats, and he's the guy really responsible for growing the popularity and the national awareness of scows. He won a lot. He won a lot at a lot of different levels. And then Gordon Lindemann was the other guy, and he was the only guy that really had a chance against Buddy. So Gordon won inland championships too, and so there was there was Big Gordy and Little Gordy. I was the Little Gordy. And this Gordy Lindemann was built like a corner linebacker.
Really?
But the world championship was in Nassau.
Okay.
And this was now at that time in the 5.5 meter class, which was one of the Olympic classes. So they had a lot of guys all over the world. Ted Turner had a boat there.
Really?
Oh yeah, and the king of Norway and guys at Italy and Europeans were there. And we went there and we ground them down. I can remember. And really we won because we worked hard, and I learned lessons about how to compete at that level and stuff from some of the best in the world, So
That's incredible.
I've always considered myself kind of pretty lucky in terms of where I've been able to go and the stuff I've been able to do. But so after law school, after I graduated, then I had to make decisions about what I wanted to do. And I always, law school was good, but I can't say I just fell in love with the experience, you know. A lot of it was, yeah, everybody has to work hard. But, so I thought, you know, I've got 6 months before the bar exams comes up. So I'll study for the bar exam, but in the meantime, we're going to try making some sales. You couldn't do that today. You go out and buy a sewing machine. Our first sale off was up in my dad's attic up there. And it was hot. We had a little air conditioning thing about that. You know, it was the middle of the summer. And we built, and we had just enough wall. This room probably is about, it's circular here, but it wasn't any longer than from this corner to that corner. Just enough to put a, that's the way they did it back then. You stake out a triangle and then you figured out how to do all this stuff. And I don't even know whether I read a book. I visited 2 sale lofts after law school because Dick Stearns, that owned the Murphy Nye Loft in Chicago, wanted me to go work for him. And then Buddy was doing sale making too, as well as a boat that he wanted. So I got inside the lofts. I could see what they were doing, but I had no idea how to design. But we were lucky in a bunch of ways. We got the right kind of sail fabric that was new. Nobody else used it. It was a hard finish. It's like the difference between your shirt like this is flexible and then a sheet of paper that was rigid. That, you know, sailcloth is built like this. It's warp and weft, you know. And they developed these, it's like putting peanut butter on a piece of toast. And that sealed all of the little squares. And I got it because I thought, you know, from ice boating, to go fast, you want a more rigid surface, you know, something that doesn't give. And that stuff was magic. And the best part is nobody else knew how to design from it either. So we made 4 or 5 sails and redid them and cut them over again. And finally we bought a 4th one. We kind of had something that looked okay. And by the time we did our 5th and 6th one, and after maybe a half a year, we won the inland championship.
They kept winning.
So from then on, you know, and I got over the bar exam. I passed the bar exam. So I wanted to do that for my parents. You know, law school and college didn't cost them what it does today. You know, you got to mortgage a house to buy a Harvard education, let's say. And so, you know, and Dad was a doctor and he was a professional, and that's why I chose law school. I mean, to be honest, that's what it was. I didn't. It's a lot different now, but times change. So in that interim time, that's when we had the success with the sales. So I said, I'll just put the law deal for now, and this is a kind of a fun challenge. Run your own business. I never took a business course. I didn't have any of that stuff that you have, you know, I'm sure. Accounting. My brother Tom was an accountant. He did the business side of stuff.
And he had a building over in what?
Well, yeah, the second sail loft was a building opposite the boat works on the other side. That's all torn down now, but it used to be a little store with those pillars, you know, that they had on there. So that was the second one, and then the third one was where I met Diane. That was over by the village hall over by 494.
Near the marsh.
Near the marsh.
Yep. So it was just kind of a gradual evolution of how all that stuff, and we sailed a lot. The other thing we did that nobody else did at that time was people kept their sailing secrets to themselves for the most part. And when I joined the Seaboat fleet here with the Sun Dodgers that I was talking about, you know, they had pretty good sailors, but they didn't have great sailors. Nat Robbins was winning everything in the E-boat, but the Seaboat class wasn't that good. So we were pretty successful right away. And with that success, though, we wanted to travel and go outside and sail at more regattas, because I'd done that with Wells in the E-boat and got to know people. And so we would travel. We'd go back and forth in the springtime. We'd go down to Texas for regattas, or Lottawanna down to Kansas City and sail. But when I came back, I would tell the guys what I learned. And we had a bunch of guys that basically they went out and sailed afterwards. Now, you don't see that today. It doesn't happen. It just doesn't happen. There are too many things going on. But of those guys that went out and sailed, there were 6 of them eventually, and all of them won either an inland championship or a national championship. You know, Peter Watson, Billy Allen, you know, Andy Shuttle, you know, Peter Watson. You know, those are the guys that And we all competed. It didn't last forever. There was a golden era of that. And, you know, they had a 20-boat seaboat fleet, but even if you got lucky and hit a corner once in a while, you never could sustain a win. So none of those guys would ever win. So eventually, it kind of, it changed. But
You won. I got to be his crew, and we won.
In what boat?
and see how Diane sailed in the MC. So we'd won
MC.
championships in those boats.
And then he bought me a Melgus
Oh, the 17, yeah.
17,
Oh.
and he named it Diane.
Oh.
But it was kind of a
A wreck, yeah.
dud. So I only had that for 2 years.
Well, I got it cheap, you know, we got it cheap from Melgus with a used boat. There was a boat that they'd promoted with it, so I got it for next to nothing, you know, but it was more of a pain than it was worth. Stuff would fall off that boat.
Oh gosh.
But Mama wanted it, so we thought, you know, we're gonna go ahead and get this thing and see how it goes.
Yep.
But now they got the Melgus 15, which is that they finally hit the jackpot with that boat.
That's a great boat.
That's going to be awesome.
Tell us more about your sailing career, Diane.
Yeah.
Well, Erica and I won the crew trophy.
Okay.
Yeah, and that's a really big one. And then sportsmanship.
Of course.
Yeah. And that's about it. But
That's great. Diane, do you remember the first time that you went sailing?
yeah, we bought my ex-husband and I. We bought Pearson 22, and we named it after my grandmother, Maya, Sweden, and it was out there on the, right next to the big island.
Yeah.
And that's what.
Tell me more, Gordy, about how your career as an Olympic coach started.
Yeah. The Olympic thing, I'd sailed and sailed internationally because I was on the U.S. sailing team for 8 years in a Finn class and then in a Flying Dutchman class. So we'd gotten around to different parts of the world and were able to see some things. But after, what was I, maybe 41, when I thought, all this travel and stuff is great, but after a while it can grind on you, a little bit, see a lot of airports and, don't have a great home life. So I think at that point I pretty well decided that we were going to come back, I would work here and keep working with the sail business. But I got a call about if I wanted to join this group about Olympic sailing and what was going on. And there were a lot of people that I knew from being on the circuit, a lot of friends, and it was out in Denver. And so we went to that thing, and everybody, I think there were maybe 20 of the top sailors and coaches in the country. And I went there and, everybody talked, everybody gave a little kind of demonstrations, did stuff, I didn't realize that they were auditioning for an Olympic coach. For me, I went because I wanted to know more about what the national and international sailing was all about. And Jerry Jobson was there. There were a lot of people that were big names in the sport. And then I got an invitation to go back to the second one. So we did that. And then finally the third one, we were down in Miami, and they would be, you'd be on a boat, and then they'd have a sports psychologist sitting there and watching you interact with the sailors.
Wow.
So after those 3 experiences, and there was a lot to it, but after those 3 experiences, I got a call from Andy Kostanecki and asked me if I wanted to be Olympic sailing coach. So I said, well, I got to think about that one, because it was a 3-year commitment.
Wow.
So it was the first year would have been over in Europe, in Estonia. That was Ted Turner's Goodwill Games, and it was between the U.S. and Russia.
Wow.
And then the pre-Olympics, that was the same year. That would have been September every year, basically all of September every year. I was in Busan in Korea, in the southern tip of Korea.
Wow.
And that first year, I would swear the only white guy there.
Really?
I'd go out for a run in the morning and go up in the hills and stuff, and people would be looking at you, and it's kind of I know what it feels like to be a minority now. Yeah. And so the Goodwill Games was just between the Asians. I got to see that, and again, there's a ton of stories about all of those things, and I've been so lucky to be able to do all this stuff. But then the second year, then that was the pre-Olympics, what they call a test event today, and then we had a team there and did all the things. But what I remember most about that first experience, I got back, and it was windy. I mean, man, it blew, and all the information that the U.S. team had was at light air. There wasn't a lot of wind. And I went there and, I mean, there were big waves. We're out there in the current and stuff, and, the waves were as high as this over here. So I got back to the Olympic Committee, and the first they didn't believe me. I'm sitting there at a big table, and they're all stretched out, and they're going like, maybe we picked the wrong guy from Minneapolis, So, but I think what happened, all the wind instruments, I don't know if they put them out behind a barn someplace or whatever, but the data was totally wrong. So we had to re-gear our thinking about, everybody training all of a sudden realized that, this was a heavy weather venue, and you had to go and you had to work that pretty hard. But we had some exceptional sailors who went to that thing, and our results at the test event were pretty good, and all the boats are in containers. It's quite a show unless you get to see it. And so then the following year was the Olympics, and of course, we had a training camp in LA where we trained for 2 weeks. We did some things, and I knew some of the coaches were there, and I was a head coach. They didn't have a lot of class specialized coaches. The women did. This was the first year that the women had a chance at a gold medal in a 470 class.
Wow.
And going to the Olympic ceremony was just, you walk into that stadium and there's over 100,000 people there, and they're screaming and yelling, and you're walking in.
Wow. We've got videos of that.
Oh yeah.
Really?
But we walked in behind the basketball team, and you don't know how big these people are until you're standing next to one. I mean, incredible.
Wow.
So that was great. And then at the Olympics themselves, it was windy every day. And at the end of the day, we won 1 gold. The women won the first gold that they had for women's classes.
That's amazing.
And 2 silvers and 2 bronze. So the next best country, I think, had 2 medals out of that. So we had a huge edge. I wish we had that same kind of edge today. This last Olympics, we won 1 bronze medal. So a lot's changed, but those memories stay with you. I'm always going to be an American when it comes to yachting or anything else. You don't put in 3 years coaching the best people in the country and having the results that we did without it staying with you. And they have so many good friends and memories from doing that whole thing. So
that's incredible.
But after that, then at that time, I decided to take up coaching after the sail-off stuff, and gradually had my own private coaching thing. My dad had a little newsletter that I read and did stuff and wrote tuning guides and stuff how to sail boats. But I got a good break with a sailing school here. My brother Mark was involved quite heavily with the classes, and they weren't getting the kind of results that they wanted. So they thought, well, maybe they'd specialize in for the X-boat class and the laser class, and part of the Opti class, they would get somebody that was a full-on racing experience. So I had the credentials for that, and the first year was really very successful. And the second year, we won both the junior and senior inland at Pewaukee. So, and I had a small number of coaches that I could work with, because most of it was learn to sail stuff.
Yep.
So, and that was a big part of the pie that they had out here.
Yeah.
But I think the winning generated the kind of pride that they needed, and we've had a lot of years where we were very successful as a yacht club and as a sailing school.
We have.
And for me, when I'm looking back at it, I think one of the things, there were a bunch of reasons. One, I didn't want to go to Chicago and drive in the kind of traffic that they had back then. And on the flip side, I didn't want to go to Lake Geneva and condemn myself and my wife at that time to living like out in the country where nothing, in the wintertime, nothing happens. Lake Geneva is a summertime lake for the most part. And that was, I just didn't want to, I couldn't do that. So I wanted to come home because I felt loyal to what was going on around here. And I felt a duty almost to people like Nat Robbins and Ted Greer and these guys that taught me. And so now we're doing that with the sailing school kids here. And thanks to Clare and Samuel and a lot of hard work by a lot of people, you know, the last 3 years or so, we've been fabulously successful. We're doing financially way better than we ever have. When I started, there wasn't a lot of free money to buy anything. I don't think I ever told you that, but you know. But now we have might be too much stuff. You know, we got so much stuff, it's unbelievable. But that's because the people worked hard. We have your best advertising is your performance and how you work with the parents, and it's a different environment now than when it was way back when I started sailing, because it's a totally different deal now. Back then it was the Pillsburys and the Daytons and people, millionaires around the lake, that some of them were just summer homes, you know. And now the property values are so high, you can't live on the lake unless you have a lot of money. There's nobody that has 6 boys on the lake anymore, I'll guarantee you that. So families are smaller, and there's no more sailing families, because a lot of the kids that we had already knew pretty much how to sail. We didn't have to start at the learn to race level. And so all of that stuff has made a difference. So now we work a lot harder at knowing the parents. We have to market ourselves. I mean, as a coach, you're always selling the sport no matter what. But managing this place, you know, you have to sell what we have here. And we think we got a pretty good thing going.
Yeah.
And so we're recognized all around the country. Thanks to Sam and Clare, I got nominated for the Nat Harrishoff Award, which is given annually to I guess, the most prestigious coach in the country. And I felt honored and kind of very surprised, because I'll tell you one story. So the way I got this was Clare told me to come over to Carson's Bay because we had an emergency. Diane probably thought I was going to lose my job, you know. But I go over there and I'm just curious. So Sam and Clare meet me at the door, and we walk into the meeting room that they had here. And down at the far end, there's a laptop sitting up there. And so they usher me back there, and you were filming the whole thing. I didn't know, I didn't really know that was happening. And so on the other side, there's Henry Brower. He's the president of U.S. Sailing. So he introduces himself, and I talked to him. I didn't know him, but, you know, and then he told me about me winning, that they wanted to, you know, that I'd been nominated to win the Harrishoff Award. So that was quite a shock to my nervous system, you know.
What were your first thoughts when you heard you won?
Well, I didn't even know about the award, you know. I knew about Harrishoff, who was the great designer for the America's Cup boats, but, you know, and I'm just thinking, God, this is for me, it's, you know, it's a lifetime award kind of in a lot of ways, and everybody likes to get recognized, whether you like it or not, you know. But I do think that the second thought I had was, I think it's a great opportunity for us to market our program and what we're doing for kids around here. And, you know, we have to compete against every other sport. You know, hockey is 365 days a year, and every sport is just like that. And, you know, we have some problems that we don't get the experienced kids anymore, where a lot of other places do. And some of these kids are going to Florida in the wintertime, stuff like that. You go down to Lake Geneva and you find out, you know, a lot of those kids are sailing year-round. Yeah. So we have to do in 8 months what everybody else does in 12 months. And my standard, just to conclude, my standard around here is how many kids we can send to colleges that want to go on and improve their sailing career. And our kids are fabulously successful. They know who we are now. They recruit from here because they know the kids that come out of this program. We average anywhere from 12 to about 6 kids every year that are feeding into the college program. And the best thing about it, they come back and help us out. They do. You know, they come back and show up, and they show that they're grateful for the experience we've had, and makes us feel good about what we're doing. Yeah. So, yeah.
And we love you so much.
Oh,
you and Sam.
I love you both.
Well, you guys have made a difference for me. Yeah. I'm not so sure I'd still be doing this if it wasn't for you guys. So, yeah.
Well,
yeah.
I would not be here without your coaching and
yeah.
my time here on the 420 race team, and just even when I was sailing for Beneld, and you always made a point to come and coach me.
Yep.
I remember there was one day, it was windier than this, it was a laser regatta, and I was in the water. I spent most of that regatta swimming, you know, so I just could not keep the boat up. And finally you came over, and you weren't even my coach. And you came over and you said, I'm going to pull you up out of the water. And you pulled me up and you said, now I'm going to coach you through every race. And you know, against the rules, but I was going to get last anyway, or didn't, you know, I wasn't finishing any of the races anyway. So you coached me through the races from start to finish. And that was, I went home and I was like, you know, I can do this, because I was feeling so defeated, and you just made a point to care. And I think that's what is so special about you as a coach. I mean, our kids appreciate you, and people going back, just like talking with Betsy Allison over the weekend, who's won the Rolex Yacht Woman of the Year 5 times. And she just spoke so highly of your coaching and said, you know, Gordy is one of the reasons that I'm here today as a sailor. And how cool is that? Hearing
no, that's,
like that.
I mean, those are the stories those are things keep you in there, and I'm glad I have a chance to work with you every day.
I know.
And Mama, you too. We're a team, right?
Diane, what did the Herreshoff Trophy mean to you when Gordy won that? What did you think when you first heard?
Well, he's done everything that man did. I mean, I read it, and Gordy has done everything. I mean, there's that guy from Pewaukee that you coached.
Oh yeah, Johnny Ruff.
And Bert Foster.
Bert Foster, yeah, both of those guys were on handicap stuff, you know. So
I mean, everything he's done was good. Yeah.
You're very deserving of that recognition and award. And so what, can you tell us just quickly what national, world, inland championships you've won? What classes, years, if you remember?
Well, like I said, that early 5.5 meter class championship was a big deal. And then E-boat winning with Stuart Wells, but then we've won, I think, 5 C-boat championships for inland. Wow. And then we went into the E-boat championships and won two E-boat nationals, 1 C-boat nationals, no, 2 C-boat nationals.
Okay.
And the hardest things to win are to win something twice. You know, winning once is hard, but winning twice or even 3 times. We won 3 C-boat blue chips.
Wow.
And on this little tiny lake where anything can happen.
Yeah.
And I won those when I was at law school. I was so happy to get out of school for a week. Tom would come down, pick me up, and we just
vacation.
It was close to walking on water as I ever got. But, you know, and then a bunch of different classes, because we made sails for a lot of different classes. A taser class, which
sonar.
We did a lot of different, the Y-flyer, the sonar, you know, a lot of classes. So I've been able to be successful at a lot of different classes.
Amazing.
2 Finn class, 2 O'Day championships, which is a national championship.
And
so
I have all the trophies to.
Yeah, they're not polished. We quit polishing trophies a long time ago.
They're such beautiful, beautiful trophies.
I'm sure it would take a very long time to polish all of the trophies that you have in your home.
I'm not going to do that, but.
Yeah, I do that.
Now let's wrap up with maybe one more story from each of you about your favorite sailing memory, yacht club memory, regatta, just your favorite memory of being in this community.
Well, I think that Shangoya dance was the best. Because, you know, out here in Lake Minnetonka, you know, when you have 2 great yacht clubs, Wayzata and Minnetonka, you need to get together and after the races and just go crazy and dance. That's what I think.
I love that.
Yeah.
That's great.
Yeah.
Gordy?
Well, that's important, the social life and doing the things, and that sailing is one of the few sports where some of the youngest kids can participate with the oldest people, and to have that kind of cross section is really good. The only one of the race things that I remember out here is when we borrowed a e-boat. We used to borrow. I never owned an e-boat, but we borrowed them, and I got a couple from Johnson Boat Works. But the first time we borrowed one, they had all the kinds of fancy equipment, mast rake and all this stuff. We didn't even screw around with that. We just set the mast rake wherever it was and had a great weekend, a great 3 days here, and won. We didn't even have to sail the last races, I remember. So, but it was a great time, and. There's a lot of times you remember, but you remember the people, I think, the most. The trophies, they sit around the house and there's stuff sitting there, but that's not that trophies motivate little kids, because they gotta have something to hold on to,
Yeah.
But the more you sail, the more you do. It's more about the people you've been to and the memories of the racing, and where the racing's close and it's just a foot to or a foot there. Those are things you remember. Yeah.
Do you have any advice for young sailors, young athletes?
Well, I think the best advice, obviously, is to get out and sail, work hard at your sport, ask questions, be aware that sailing is a physical sport too. I preach, you got to feel a boat from your feet all the way up through your hands, where your head is, how you look. You got to do all of those things. And so we're modifying what we do with Optimus now, and it's, I think, going to start to work. This is going to be the first year that we really go full on with that, and for our advanced kids. So enjoy every day and sail as hard as you can. Sail like it's their last race.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
What are some of the regattas that you have coached sailors in that stand out to you? Regattas or just sailors in general?
Well, sometimes just even. Pardon? Oh yeah. Well, we coached Erica at the Rolex, and Johnny Ruff and Bert Foster, and getting people that have a chance for medals, and just friends winning races at like inland championships or invitationals for people over in Michigan that we'd sell sails for. A couple of guys we did. He'd never won anything before. I'd get in the middle of the boat and we had a good day and everything, and pulling the strings and doing everything that it takes, and
Amazing.
You got to feel good about that. I've spent a lot of time crewing for people to keep them, make them enjoy the sport, but learn different things about it. So I could have sailed a lot more myself. Part of it was a business strategy, but part of it was, you don't have to win another race. God, that's not what drives me anymore. And did when I was a kid, but once you get beyond that, you enjoy the sport more. And I think my advice to the kids is it's not so much about whether you win that day, but it's how much you learn that day.
Yeah.
And so if you learn the kind of things that it takes to go out and win the next day or the next week, that's what you want.
Yeah.
And win something and have fun.
Yeah.
That's what we say.
Have fun.
Yep.
And you still sail?
Yep, sure do. Yep.
Pretty
I'm
often.
Looking forward to see you. Well, one of my things, I'm going to be sailing with a Yingling class
Oh, that's
a
great.
couple of times, because I think we want to sell both ends. We got the Melgus 15 for kids that are really fast, but they need to learn how the value of teamwork and when things are a slower, a different kind of boat. Like the Yingling is a real pitchy boat like this. And you have to learn, you set the sails up, you trim different, you do different things. And so they have to learn the high speed end of racing, and then the kind of slower keel boat, long range play. You do things differently.
Yeah.
But if you know both ends, then anything you get into.
Yeah.
And that's been part of my success. I've sailed a lot of different classes and been pretty successful in most of them. So, not all of them, but most of them. So yeah.
Diane, can you, just to wrap us up, tell me the story of when you sailed with Gordy a couple years ago on the sonar? What did you think about that?
I was just going to mention that.
Yeah. Tell us more.
I wanted to race in my sonar that we had that came to the Minnetonka Yacht Club, and I wanted to go on it. I had cancer, and so 12 years ago, and I have a problem with my legs, but I just wanted to see if I could sail. And so they took me out for the sonar. What was it?
We had the sonar. We got Sam to sail with us.
Wasn't
So
it the
that was a
Sonar
big help.
Nationals?
And-
What
That was
regatta
here.
it?
It was a Nationals, yeah,
Yeah.
a couple years ago.
Yeah, and we tacked, and I couldn't get up.
Off the low side, yeah.
Yeah, that's when I knew I couldn't do it anymore.
But we finished the
probably right.
regatta. We finished the
But you
regatta.
finished the
We
regatta.
learned stuff.
But he pulled me up.
Yeah. Gordy or Samuel?
No, Sam
Thing,
was
both of
always
us.
doing it.
Yeah, Samuel got him out. I had to drive the boat. Sam was a cleat the jib and then get Diane off the
So
low
you
side.
still can do it. I can
Yeah.
still do it.
You can still
Yeah.
sail.
Yeah, oh yeah, she can still
You
sail.
can absolutely
Yeah.
still sail. Well, thank you
I
both so
can't.
much.
I can't wait to do it.
Oh, good.
So I enjoyed that. I wasn't crazy about the idea at first because I'd never really sailed a Yingling, and but I came away with a lot more respect for the differences in the boats and stuff. And so that's what this year again we're going to try to sell some of that because I think the kids need to see both ends
Yeah,
of how that
they do.
goes. They just do. So,
That's
yeah.
great. Well, thank you both so much for talking today.
Yeah, you're welcome.
This
Yeah.
was great.
Yeah.
I think we're
So-
probably running out of time on the camera.
Yeah,
But
we're probably
Are
done.
we-
this was so much fun.
Yeah.
Thank you.